get this filmed and put online. I think we'll start in about a minute. We'll get the thumbs up. We got the thumbs up. Okay, good. So we had a few of you come back, it looks like, and a few of you may have brought other people. I'm encouraged by the fact you're coming back. We are putting Christianity on trial, and we're in week 2 of a 12-week series on this topic. I want you to open your mental Bible to the book of Genesis. So think in your head and open to Genesis. Turn to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and think of the first 4 words of your Bible. In the beginning, God. Sometimes we get hung up on the first 3 words, in the beginning, but think of the first 4 words. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. Now open your mental Bible to John, the Gospel of John. Go to chapter 1, verse 1, and the first 6 words of John. In the beginning was the Word. So in the beginning, God. In the beginning was the Word. And that's where we start. With any discussion about God, that's where we start. Is there a God? Is there a higher power? Is there some kind of supreme being out there directing the order of the universe? Is there a God out there? We also need to look at, are human beings created in the image of God? Or are we just some kind of advanced ape-like creature that finds itself on this rock spinning through the universe at thousands of miles an hour? What are we? Are we creatures capable of moral action? Can we take action on the basis of something that we define as morality? And is there even an objective morality? Is there a morality that's true whether I like it or not? And to put that in context for you, the easiest example to think of is the Holocaust. I think everybody agrees that the Holocaust was bad. Everyone agrees that when a nation state takes it upon itself to kill 6 million of a certain ethnicity, that's a bad thing. We can even get an atheist to agree with us on that point. And it's a bad thing whether the Nazis thought it was good or not. That entire society thought that was a good thing to do. So obviously nation states can't determine what's good and what's bad. What's good and what's bad, that objective morality is what we call it. That objective morality exists outside of ourselves. Where does that come from? Our worldview has to answer for that. And then lastly, what do we do with the historical figure of Jesus? No real historian doubts that a man named Jesus of Nazareth physically walked the earth in the 1st century and was a Jew in Israel, in Judea at that time. No serious historian doubts that fact. You may run into internet atheists that doubt that, or people who aren't well-read or up on their history, but it's a fact of history that a man named Jesus walked the earth. What are we going to do with that? What do we do with his truth claims? Christians have an answer for that, but not just Christians. Every single worldview has to have an answer for God, humans, and Jesus. Every worldview has to answer those 3 questions. We're going to get into worldviews today as we open. Welcome to the opening statement of Christianity on Trial. We are going to talk worldviews because before we can even have a discussion about spiritual things or about God, we've got to take a step outside ourselves and look at the lens through which we view the world. All of us have a lens through which we view the world. I'm willing to guess that the majority of you, maybe 90 to 99% of you out there, since we're in a church, have a Christian worldview. We wake up in the morning, we put on our Christian worldview glasses, and that's how we go about the day. And that's a wonderful thing. We have that worldview for good reasons. But other folks have different worldviews. They have a different lens through which they view the world. We're going to talk about that because in order to connect with anybody, we're going to have to know how they view the world, how they view truth, how they view God, and how they view humans. Last week, we talked about how we can no longer bury our heads in the sand, come to church, go home, have an awesome fellowship with God, and live and die without ever interacting with culture because culture finds us, and objections find us, and objections find our children. and we've got to be able to deal with them. So I went on the internet, and very quickly I found some social media memes that may find you at certain times, and I had a kick with this. So believers do good things out of fear of death and hell with the expectation of great reward. Atheists do the right thing because it's the human thing to do. Before you walked in the doors, before you have any apologetics training or classes, I hope you're able to see the fallacy in the first statement. Anyone who understands Christianity know that we're not walking around in fear, and especially the way they define fear and the fear of God. So you can answer that one. But the second thing, we're really going to beat up on, what in the world is the human thing to do? What does that even mean? What is the human thing to do? But that poster comes out of an atheistic worldview, a humanistic worldview. And we're going to learn what that worldview is. Here's another one. Adults with imaginary friends are stupid. So they get right to the point and just attack you personally. That's called ad hominem. Anybody heard of ad hominem in philosophy? All right, ad hominem, to the person, attack the person. You do an ad hominem, you lose. And that's true whatever religion you are. You're not dealing with ideas anymore. Either you start to lose, or maybe you just woke up on the wrong side of the bed, so you just attack the person, call them stupid. That's a losing argument because it's not even an argument. This is a good one. Science flies you to the moon. Religion flies you into skyscrapers. You take each one of those by themselves. Science flies you to the moon. Agree? Flies you to the moon. So do a lot of other things that exist outside of science that science relies upon. And religion flies you into skyscrapers. Well, there's just one religion, and it's not even the entire religion. It is a sect of that religion that has perverted its teachings into something terroristic. So a little bit more explanation, but you see where we're getting. These things are easy to lob out there, and we've got to be able to deal with it intellectually and have good responses to this. So we move on to class 2, the opening statement. This will be the last class that previews anything. We're going to preview a couple topics. We're going to talk about worldviews, and then each other class is a deep dive into a particular topic. So starting next week is a deep dive into creation. And then there's be a deep dive into fine-tuning. We'll spend the entire class on that one topic. There should be more handouts, and if not, then come ready to take notes. And if you need slides, I'll email them to you if you want them. But these are going to be the classes 3 through 12 are going to be deep dives into single topics and be a little bit more of a lecture format where I hope you learn something. I hope you learn something. But in this, if you notice, classes 3 and 4, we talk about evidence for a beginning or fine-tuning of the universe. We're not necessarily talking about the Christian God. So there are ways to move people on this spectrum, and this is an important spectrum that we're talking about. The first few classes, we're going from, okay, assume with me there's no God. How do you answer for creation? How do you answer for fine-tuning? How do you answer for these other things? That may move somebody to belief in, okay, I believe in a God, but I don't believe in your God. I don't like your God. Then we get into the Gospels. So as we move into the Gospels, we start moving folks to the Christian God. And then even, I don't like your God. Well, we'll deal with the objection, the problem of evil. We'll deal with objection of slavery and genocide in the Old Testament. But keep in mind on this spectrum, not every class is going to be a deal winner and get you all the way to the Christian God. We're going to have some classes where we just talk about the intellectual viability of the fact that any God at all exists and bring people along this spectrum. And I put spiritualism and pantheism kind of right beside no God because it's very similar to not even having a God, a monotheistic idea of God. So when you think of monotheism, we have the main monotheistic religions are Islam, Judaism, Christianity. Monotheism is one God. We all three of those share the idea of God with a capital G, one God. That's a huge leap from some kind of earthy spiritualism, pantheism. So pantheism is many gods. Monotheism, one God. Pantheism, many gods. The idea to one God is such a big leap that we move that along the spectrum from no God to a God. Now, anybody read fitness magazines or business magazines. You don't have to raise your hand, but they're flashy covers as you walk by the airport bookstore, and you just got to pick one up because you don't want to do the work that you brought with you. So you look at these magazines and you just got to pick one of those up. Or if you don't do magazines, maybe magazines are kind of a thing of the past, because I think the only time I ever look at one is I happen to be in the airport. But if you look at blogs or read websites, or to get really trendy and up to date, you follow influencers on social media. Maybe on LinkedIn or whatever the latest thing is. If you follow any of this or read any business or fitness magazines, there's one thing that's going to be all the rage. Let me tell you what it is. So on Friday, I Googled, what do successful people do in the morning? You want to be successful, you wake up in the morning. I said, what do successful people do in the morning? And here are the Google lists. I got 14 things successful people do first in the morning, 10 simple things successful people do every morning, 14 things successful people do before breakfast, and on and on and on. And if you look at those websites, we have Inc.com. That's Inc. as in corporation. That's a kind of a company type web magazine. Entrepreneur.com. That's a business website. BusinessInsider.com. Forbes. Go Banking Rates. And then RD is the Reader's Digest. So of those results, 5 of them are business or corporate type magazines telling me, here's how you get ahead in business. This is what you do in the morning. So you can probably guess what some of those things are. Working out's going to be on every list. But one of those things is meditation. In every single one of those articles is meditation. Every single one. Any of y'all run into this? Meditation is really coming on. It's all the rage. You see it talked about in magazines, websites, and all these lists. How do you get ahead? What do we got to do? Meditation's in there. And at first, when this started popping up, probably 5 or 6 years ago, but it's gaining steam. It's gaining steam. And at first I thought, that's kind of good, because the world out there realizes that there's a spiritual side to us. And they're giving credence in their own little way to the fact that we have this spirit and that we've got to pay some homage to the Spirit. So that we can work with that. We can work with that. But then it started annoying me, because every time you read one of these, it goes to great lengths to not mention Christianity. Now, I would venture to guess that in the corporate world, there are Christians out there. And there are probably Christians that have a morning quiet time. But every one of these goes to great lengths just to say meditation generally, or if you dig down into it, it describes some kind of Eastern meditation. And I thought, well, why is that? It is because of the worldview in which these articles are written. There's an overwhelming non-Christian worldview. Or it's the worldview of, you know what, everything's acceptable, Eastern meditation, whatever, but we can't mention that one. We're not going to mention Christian meditation. So that's the worldview that these are written from. And to me, it's a lost opportunity. Because at the same time that our society is recognizing that we have a spirit, or that we need some kind of quiet time in the morning, that there needs to be some space and some peace, they're blowing this great opportunity to mention, oh, by the way, there are some folks that wake up and spend time in what they believe is the Word of God. There are some folks that wake up and spend time in what they believe are ancient historical writings, ancient scriptures. That's us. And that is a wonderful practice, and it's kind of ignored. But I bring that up not to just take shots at our culture, but I bring it up to say that there's a worldview out there. You're going to start seeing these now. Go start Googling or go look in a business magazine. You're going to see meditation mentioned. I bring it up to show you the worldview in which it's written from. What are worldviews? Y'all seen this bumper sticker? I love it. I couldn't agree more. We need to coexist. We don't need to kill each other, okay? I need to tolerate you. You need to tolerate me. And you shouldn't come kill me. I shouldn't come kill you. Totally agree. We got to coexist, right? That's not what it means, is it? They've hijacked the word. Hijacking the word coexist and making it mean approve. Approve of all of them. Or they're all true, guys. Just shut up. They're all true. We're all going to the same spot. Get your religion off me. You got your thing. I got my thing. Let me be. That's what it means. They've kind of hijacked the word from it. But every time I see that, I smile because I'm like, I agree, coexist. Let's define it the way the dictionary does. We should coexist. That's a good thing. But what is a worldview? Everyone's got one. Even if you don't realize that you have a worldview, you have one. Everybody has to make sense of the world. Worldviews start with the answer of, is there a God? You've got to answer that question and start from there. Here are the main worldviews. We have atheism, kind of starting at one end of the spectrum, secular humanism and naturalism, scientism, agnosticism, Hindus, Buddhists, Eastern spiritualism, and I've lumped in, and I'd probably get in trouble if I was talking to anyone who held these views, and I apologize, but I've lumped in for our purposes New Age, Taoism, Confucianism, kind of anything Eastern, I've lumped it in that category. Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. So our major worldviews presented right there. There's others, but those are the major ones. Atheism, self-explanatory. There is no God. But they go far enough to make a truth claim. And the truth claim is, it is true that there is no God. I am making an affirmative statement. There is no God. I like that. I like the atheist worldview because while Christianity makes truth claims and we're expected to back it up, by atheists making the truth claim, they've got to back that up. There is no God. Okay, you need to have proof for your truth claim. So atheism, self-explanatory. Secular humanism and naturalism. This is where we get into Darwinism. It's a very popular worldview, and it can coincide with some atheism as well. You can be an atheist and a secular humanist. But many prominent intellectuals, I mentioned the four horsemen of the new atheists last time. We have Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and some of those other guys that are out there debating Christians. They're out there influencing people. They're writing books called God is Dead. Those guys would consider themselves humanists. They believe in humans and all that we stand for. But if you boil it down, it's essentially the belief that, as Frank Turek and Norm Geisler say in their book, they have an excellent book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. As they say in their book, it's from goo to the zoo to you. That's their take on how we got here. We started off as some kind of primordial goo. Then we ended up evolving into the zoo, some kind of animal, and now you. From the goo to the zoo to you. I love it. But that's essentially the secular humanist or the Darwinist worldview, from the goo to the zoo to you. And here you are. And how do you answer for all these other things? So that's the worldview that's talking about. Scientism. Scientism is where we, remember that one. The view that science has an answer for everything, and if we can't prove it by science, then it does not exist or it is not worthy of intellectual consideration. So it's the view that science and only science describes the world as it is in itself, independent of perspective. Critics say that scientism is a matter of putting too high a value on natural science in comparison with other branches of learning and culture. So science will even, the scientism view, will even exclude a lot of philosophy because we can't touch, taste, and feel that. We can't do experiments with it, so we're not going to bring that into the worldview. It's essentially an excessive belief in the power of the scientific method. Now, that doesn't sound all that bad. And many folks will put on an air of superiority and say that if science doesn't prove it, then I will not believe it. And it sounds really intellectual. And it may even intimidate you a little bit. Science must prove it. Well, that's an easy thing to say. But there are 10 things that science doesn't prove that science relies upon. And we're going to talk about those, called presuppositions of science. There's another good one. Science changes its views based on evidence. Religion changes its views based on popular opinion when it's afraid of losing its members. Not quite true, but those are the things that are out there. What is a presupposition? Well, before you read the slide, think of presupposition as a foundation. I can't build a house until I have a foundation. I can't do science without these presuppositions. They are foundational principles on which science relies in order to do science. Think about it. The existence of the world. Are we in some kind of matrix? Well, if you're going to do science, you have to believe that the world exists, that all this isn't imaginary. The orderly nature of the world, that there is order in nature. If you're going to do science, you got to believe in order of the world. And we can't prove that by using science. Science relies upon that in order to do science. The knowability of the world. I got to believe that there's things I can know about the world. The existence of truth and the laws of logic. This one will probably resonate most with you. The fact that truth exists and that logic is reliable. We have to have those in order to do science. And science does not prove those. Those are philosophical concepts. Science, in fact, relies on philosophy first before you can do science. That's the flaw in scientism. The reliability of our cognitive and sensory faculties to serve as truth gatherers and as a source of justified beliefs in our intellectual environment. That's essentially, can we rely on our senses, or do our senses lie to us? The adequacy of language to describe the world. When you do a scientific experiment, you publish a paper. Can we express ourselves through language? Well, science doesn't prove that, but science relies upon it. Again, the existence of values used in science, the uniformity of nature and induction, and the existence of numbers. 1 + 1 = 2. When I wake up tomorrow, 1 + 1 is still going to equal 2. We don't live in a world where each day math and logic change on us. Science relies upon that. Science relies upon the fact that we don't live in that kind of world. Also, the existence of numbers. Where does number 17 live? I don't know. It exists. Can you show me number 17? Can I taste it, touch it, feel it? I can't. You can show me 17 things, but you're not showing me the number 17. You see, numbers are a philosophical concept. Math is a philosophical concept. In order to do science, there are things that science relies upon to do itself. That's the entire point, that there are presuppositions of science. So, take home of this point is anyone who says, I rely on science, and if science doesn't prove it, I'm not going to believe it, you show them the 10 presuppositions of science. The fact that we've got to do philosophy before we even do science. Also, there's the worldview, and this is also in scientism to some extent. If I can't see it, touch it, taste it, or feel it, I don't believe it. Ask them the question, is that true? How do you know? Because I can't see, touch, taste, or feel that statement you just made. That statement's a truth claim. When we're dealing with truth claims, we're dealing in philosophy and metaphysics and in religion and spirituality. So the fact that someone says, I've got to use my senses, see it, touch it, taste it, feel it, that is a philosophical truth claim that they need to back up. And I can't see, taste, touch, or feel that statement you just made. So how are you going to prove that? You see, it's called self-defeating. That's a self-defeating statement. Let's move on to agnosticism. Agnosticism is we don't know. We don't know. And there's two types. One is we don't know, and we have the ability to find out, we just don't know yet. So the other is we don't know and we can't know. There's no way we're ever going to figure this out. We don't know and we can't know. Two types of agnostics. Agnosticism, like atheism, can meld with some of these other worldviews. You may find someone who shares secular humanism, scientism, agnosticism, kind of has a bit of each. But they don't know that. That's the good part about worldviews. A lot of people don't even know they have a certain worldview until you start studying this. Hindus and Buddhists, polytheism, and then Eastern spiritualism. On Eastern spiritualism, this is where we get into some of the meditation that we're talking about that's really coming on in our nation. And it's neat to see. I want to tell you a story. It's about a little girl born in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Her parents were unmarried, and they separated before she was born. She had a very difficult childhood. She lived in great poverty, and she often had to dress in potato sacks, which she was mocked at school, of course. Very, very deep poverty in Mississippi. She was sexually abused at an early age. From the age of 14, she went to live with her father, and then she started working her way through college. She got very interested in journalism. So interested and so talented that she got a gig at the local TV station as an anchor. But she had this emotional style, and that emotional style was just a bit too much for being a TV anchor. So, recognizing her talent, someone gave her the opportunity to take over an ailing daytime TV program. She took it over. No one expected much out of it, and turned it into a success. And that program took off, and she got her own show. Anybody know where we're going with this? Let me hear it. Yes. Thank you, extroverts. If you don't get that, you weren't here last time. Oprah, one of the most influential people of our time. A self-made billionaire. She has her own magazine, her own network, her own book club. You name it, she's got it. Let me give you some numbers. 55 million. That's the number of books sold after being selected in the Oprah Book Club. Of the 70 books that she singled out for inclusion in her book club, 59 of them made the USA Today bestseller list. 5. That's the number of new shows and new hosts that were propelled to fame after being on Oprah. They include Susie Orman, Rachel Ray, Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, and Nate Berkus. These are names we all know. They all started on Oprah. That's the power of Oprah. Why are we talking about Oprah? Let me tell you a little bit about her spiritual journey. In high school, she wrote in the yearbook of her friend Gary Holt. She said, "You have showed me more by your actions, by the way you live day to day, that there is truly one way, Jesus Christ!" Exclamation point. And that without him taking control, without him running the whole show, life is just an endless go-round with no meaning. She wrote that. And then she describes, though, in her spiritual journey that there was a turning point. And as in many Oprah stories, she's the hero of her own story. She said, "I started to think for myself. And that's when I really started in my mid-20s, my own journey towards my spirituality, my spiritual self." That's good. Any of you wanting to go on a journey, a spiritual journey, think for yourselves. Absolutely. The Christian faith can stand up to itself. The Christian faith, you have to go on your own journey. So that's not a problem. She says, "I was just sitting there thinking for the first time after being raised Baptist. Church, church, church. Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. I thought, now why would God, who is omnipotent, who has everything, who was able to create me and raise the sun every morning, why would that God be jealous of anything I have to say? Why would he be jealous of anything I have to say? Or be threatened by any question I would have to ask?" So Oprah's now turning into, where is she going? So Ravi Zacharias has a great book out. If you do any study in the apologetic space, you're going to run into something by Ravi. Ravi was raised in India under Hinduism, under pantheism, polytheism, and he converted at the age of 17, and now he's a very influential speaker. Ravi's got a book, Why Jesus? Discovering His Truth in an Age of Mass-Marketed Spirituality. Very good resource to combat the whole Eastern spiritualism meditation influence coming in, is to talk to someone who grew up under that and is now a Christian. He says, "Really, Oprah? That's what started it all? Do you really want us to believe that all of a sudden, after preaching the truths of the Bible for years and memorizing whole books of the Bible, which it said she had done, you didn't like this God you've been following? If this renunciation of God is true, either she didn't understand what the text meant and what she believed all her life, or she was deliberately looking for a way out to choose this reason for rejecting the faith of her childhood and youth." We talked about that last time, deliberately looking for a way out. How we can answer every objection somebody may have, but at the end of the day, it could be a matter of the heart. Ravi says, "Often when we are struggling with how best to say we no longer believe what we once did, it is easiest to find one idea and either warp it or take it out of context and make ourselves heroes for being willing to renounce the unacceptable." And that's what she did by talking about jealous God. I mean, that's one of the easiest things to lob. How could God be jealous? And it's also something that's very simple to answer. And if you haven't thought through that on your own, I encourage you to, because you're going to get that at some point. I don't understand why God would be jealous. Well, the jealousy there is an important word that we define before we even have that conversation. And also talking about what's the highest and best good in our lives before we even have that conversation, before we even talk about what is meant by jealous God. So I encourage you to think through that. That's not what this class is about, but that's what Oprah chose on her way out. And then she ends with, on a show called Remembering Your Spirit. It was introduced with New Age music in the background as she said, "I am defined by the world as a talk show host, but I know that I am much more. I am a spirit connected to the greater spirit." So her journey was complete, and she had this guy Deepak Chopra on her show. He's an Indian. I think he grew up in India. Now he's kind of a guru, kind of a woo-woo guy. And he would get spiritually and talk about the meditation, and it's definitely the Eastern style, Om type meditation. And Oprah really got into this. And to just show you how far she had come is our freedom lies in remaining open continuously, not only to life's changes, but also to the divine light within us and others. Okay, the whole concept of divine light within us and others, and we're all little gods running around, that's a very Eastern concept. I bring up Oprah, and I bring all that up to show you that someone as powerful as her, some will say she's the most influential human being we have right now, definitely the most influential woman in the world, maybe second to Michelle Obama, but that woman, that powerful, pumping this out there all the time. Also being pumped out there as those meditation articles we mentioned. So that's all coming, now you recognize, that's all coming from an Eastern spiritualism type worldview. Let me run down the rest of these. Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, the three monotheistic ones. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on Islam and Judaism, but now we're getting into monotheism on the spectrum of worldviews. So what's the difference? What's the point of all this? Don't all these lead to the same place? You'll have some people that say that. Why are Christians so dogmatic? Why do they believe that their way is the only way? Well, the answer to that question is everybody does. Everybody, every single one of these religions makes a truth claim, multiple truth claims. Every one of them says, this is right, this is wrong, we believe this, we don't believe that. For example, Buddhism grew out of Hinduism. It was a rejection of the Hinduism of the time. They're not all the same. There are different beliefs within all of them, and the nature of those beliefs is that when you make a truth claim, the opposite can't be true. If I say Jesus is the Son of God, then it can't also be true that he wasn't the Son of God. Two things can't be true at the same time. If I say that there is only one God and Muhammad is his prophet, it's the rallying cry of Islam. It can't also be true that there are multiple gods and Muhammad is not a prophet. So Islam makes a truth claim. Can all these be true at the same time? No, because that's the nature of truth. The law of non-contradiction. I don't want to lose you, but it's a little bit philosophical. One of the most important laws in logic is the law of non-contradiction. A is A. A is not B. A cannot be both A and B at the same time. Something can't be both true and false at the same time. If it's true, the opposite of it is false. That's the law of non-contradiction. And it's important when having a discussion about religion. So someone says, if somebody says, you know what, they're all true. They're all true, and if you believe differently, then you're wrong. Well, there's two things in there. By saying they're all true, they're trying to sound magnanimous. They're all true. That's a truth claim. And it says, if you believe differently, then you're wrong. Well, I'd turn around and ask, is that true? Is that true? Is that true for you? Because you're making a truth claim now, which is exclusive of what I believe. If you think I'm wrong, then there's a right and there's a wrong. You are making a truth claim. Truth, by definition, excludes. Peter weighs 190 pounds. Peter does not weigh 191. That's the nature of truth. If it's true, it can't be both true and false at the same time. Just a quick note on that. Truth, by definition, is exclusive. It excludes the other. So all religions make these claims. Now the difference. So what's the difference between all these? Secular humanism. I mean, just think about it. Secular humanism, naturalism. That's when you think of the Nazis, when you think of Stalin's communism, that's the atheism or the secular humanism. Right? They were horrible nation states that killed lots and lots of people in the name of the state. Though in my view, secular humanism and naturalism will kill in the name of the state. In Islam, there is a teaching, and it's not always followed. Sometimes it is. That's why there's terrorism. But there's a teaching that they will kill when the honor of God is impugned. If you malign the honor of God, there can be a justified killing. Christianity is much different. Christian will sacrifice himself for the honor of the opposite person. Very different. David Platt tells a good story. And I don't know if it was him or someone else, but he says he was meeting with, and he was in Southeast Asia with a Hindu, a Muslim guy, and a few others of different religions. And they were all talking. And all these, they were way up in their religion. And they said, you know what? All these are just different paths up the mountain. We're on the same mountain. We're just taking different paths up there. And Platt says, you missed it. You completely missed it. We're not on the same paths. We're not on different paths up the same mountain. Christianity says that God came down the mountain to us. That's grace. God's come down the mountain to us and lifts us up it. We're not walking up the mountain. There's a world of difference between me working my way up the mountain and my God coming down that mountain to me to sacrifice himself for me, to lift me up the mountain. That is the beauty of grace. So when you think of all these worldviews, the thing that comes to my mind is the concept of grace. None of them except Christianity has that concept. They are all works-based when you get into the religion parts. They are works, we'll get into that in a second. They're works-based because they're working their way up the mountain through different methods. When you talk about Eastern spiritualism, it is the path to try to find enlightenment. I mentioned meditation. I want to define that meditation. Eastern spiritualism, they are emptying themselves and they're emptying their minds. It is trying to find this nirvanic state by emptying their minds. Maybe that's a peaceful thing. I've never tried it. Christian meditation is much different. It is a filling of the mind with the things of God. You are meditating on the Word of God. Psalm 1:1 talks about, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, or stands in the way of sinners, or sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law he what? He meditates day and night. On his law he meditates day and night. I would argue that the Christian concept of meditation, which grows out of the Jewish concept of or the Hebrew concept of meditation, predates Hinduism. Our meditation predates. We're the original meditation. I mean, you hear people talk about meditation, you're a little intimidated, like, oh man, that guru, that Eastern guy, he really knows meditation because they're old school, right? They've been doing this forever. Wrong. A good argument can be made that the Jewish and the Hebrew concept of meditation, of which we are grafted in, predates that meditation. So, let's not let the world steal our concept of meditation. We have it, and we have a good one. So know those two differences. Eastern meditation is an emptying of oneself and emptying of one mind. The Christian and the Hebrew concept of meditation is a filling of the mind with the things of God. As we open, I want to move into how do we weigh the evidence? When we look at the evidence, how do we weigh it? Do we measure God by pounds? Do we measure God by kilos? Gallons? Temperature? How do we measure God? How do I know if I'm winning? How do I know if I'm making my case? Well, that's the good part about the law. We're going to go by the burden of proof that's used in court, which is a preponderance of the evidence. In a civil trial, the party with more than 50% of the evidence wins. So I will tell you, my jury, I will tell you that you can have 49% doubt and still vote for me. I've just got to get the ball across the 50-yard line. That's the burden of proof in a civil case, and that's the burden of proof that's good enough to award billions in damages every year through our jury system. Then that burden of proof is what's going to apply to this analysis. Different from the more popular, probably for you guys, criminal burden of proof. That is, the criminal one is beyond all reasonable doubt. And even then, it's not beyond all doubt. You have to prove the case in a criminal trial in order to put the defendant away and put him in prison. It's got to be not beyond all doubt, beyond all reasonable doubt. So even then, it's still not ironclad, but we're going to use the civil one because I'm a civil trial lawyer. I don't do criminal. And if you have a criminal problem, I'm going to refer you to someone else because I don't even know how to do that stuff. We're going to use what I know. What I know is the civil burden of proof, which is 5149. And I want to tell you, there's good things that we say to juries on this to try to get the point across. You can say, I just got to get the ball across the 50. I don't need to get it to the 1. If this were a criminal trial, I'd have to get the ball to the 1-yard line. Here, I just got to get it to the 51-yard line. I just got to get it across the 50. Or we can say, imagine the scales of justice tipping over, and if it's just one little bit over, then I win, and you vote for me if I have the burden of proof. Anyone making a truth claim has to prove their case by some burden. So what burden are we going to apply? We're going to apply the preponderance of the evidence. And let me read you an excellent description of that. If I haven't explained it well enough, in law school, when I was dating my wife, we ended up in the same class. And the class was called trial advocacy. And in trial advocacy, you're put into teams, and you work your way towards the end of the year to a trial. And you're going to try it against someone else's team. Lo and behold, we just started dating, and we're put on different teams in the same trial. Talk about testing the relationship early. She was the plaintiff, I was the defendant, and in cleaning out a closet, this is a God thing, in cleaning out a closet this week, she has no idea I'm doing this, I found her closing argument. She closed, and then I closed. I found her closing argument, and in it she talks about the burden of proof. And because she's my wife, this is the most excellent description of a burden of proof you're ever going to hear. She says, now I want to talk to you real quickly about the burden of proof in this case. If you'll recall, my co-counsel got up here at the beginning of this trial, and he told you that our burden was by a preponderance of the evidence. All that means is more likely than not. We just have to prove to you that the evidence is more likely than not in our favor. Even if that means the evidence is ever so slightly in our favor, even by 1%, once we've reached that 51%, we've met our burden. That was in her 7-page closing argument, which was wonderful. But that's the burden of proof that we're going to apply to our standard and our inquiry. Now we move in the opening statement to previewing the evidence. We don't have a whole lot of time to preview much of this evidence, and I gave a little bit of a snapshot. But where I want to go is next time we're going to talk more about creation and fine-tuning, so I won't preview that. We'll just have to come to those. But I want to jump a little bit more towards the end and start with evidence for the reliability of the Gospels, because that's going to be about a month before we hit that, and there's some exciting stuff in there. I mentioned last time that if you believe that a man named Alexander the Great even existed, you believe that based on certain historical documents. Would it surprise you to know that those historical documents, of which we have one copy of it, and it's a copy of the original. So think about this. In ancient literature, we don't have any of the originals of anything. All we have are the copies that were made. So if you want to go find the original Gospel of Matthew, you're not going to find it. If you want to go find Homer's Iliad or the Odyssey, the ancient Greek writings, you're not going to find them. We have copies. So we have to rely on those copies. Those copies, hopefully we have a lot of them. I would think the more that we have, the more we can cross-check them with each other to make sure that we have accurate copies. I also hope that they were written pretty soon after the event that they describe. Now, we need to step a little bit outside of our modern viewpoint of, if I don't see it on film, it didn't happen. We have this view of concurrently recording things as they happen, and things are, in our culture, they're recorded. Think back to ancient culture. For much longer than our cultures existed, in multiple cultures across the world, was an oral culture where things were passed down orally. And then they'd be written down. But would it surprise you to learn, for Alexander the Great, we've got one copy of his work, and it was written about 500 to 800 years after the events they describe. Do you doubt Alexander the Great? Do you doubt his existence based on that? Probably not. I mean, you probably even think about it like, Curt, I haven't thought about that before. Why are you telling me this? Because let's talk about the Gospels. There are 5,800 manuscripts out there in the original Greek. If we add in Latin, there are 24,000 copies of the Gospels and other New Testament writings. Scholars call this embarrassing. There are so many copies, it is embarrassing how many we have. F.F. Bruce says that there is no body of ancient literature in the world which enjoys such a wealth of good textual attestation as the New Testament. So anyone who says that these are all just stories, they're kind of made up, they were written down long after the fact, they don't know what they're talking about. There is no body of ancient literature anywhere in the world which enjoys such a rich textual attestation as the New Testament. So we have 5,800 in the original Greek. Second to that in the ancient literature world is Homer's Iliad. That's the ancient Greek writing, Homer's Iliad. The Iliad has 650 manuscripts, and even those are fragmented. So 650 is number 2. We're number 1 with 5,800. If you take most classical literature and you stack all the known copies in the world, it's going to rise about 4 feet. 4 feet. Most classical literature, stack all the known copies, you get to 4 feet. You take all the copies of the New Testament we have, 1 mile high. That's how many copies we have. So when you read your Gospels, know that we have very, very good historical reasons for believing that this is accurate history. Because, and even if someone will say, well, it's still not accurate, well, then my response would be, well, then you can't believe anything else in ancient literature. You can't believe Alexander the Great. You can't believe that Hannibal crossed the Alps to attack Rome. You can't believe in Caesar. Because we've got more historical evidence, and if evidence is considered the writings, we've got more of that for the claims in the New Testament than we have for any of these other ancient facts. To me, that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I hope that builds you up. One more point. We're not going to talk about the resurrection until class 9. It's going to be a while. Last week I discussed a little bit about circumstantial evidence, and I love the circumstantial evidence for the resurrection. So we've got the eyewitness testimony, right? We've got people here in these historical documents saying that they saw the risen Jesus. And they're testifying to it. It's written down. It's in a document. So we've got that. That's a direct evidence. We'll get into that, but let's talk about the circumstantial evidence, kind of the other things that lend credibility to that claim. Some of the circumstantial evidence. Number 1, disciples died for their beliefs. His church history tells us that these guys died for their beliefs. Number 2, the conversion of hardened skeptics such as Paul. A guy, Saul, who was out there killing Christians and zealous for the blood of Christians and zealous for his view of what true Judaism was, immediately converts. And then you read through what Paul did in the book of Acts. That is wonderful circumstantial evidence of the resurrection, that it changed a man's life like that. Changed key social structures is the third one. Key social structures were changing. If you rejected Judaism and you were out of the temple and you were out of that system, you were pretty much ostracized from that society. It wasn't like, okay, I'm no longer going to Eastridge, I'm going to go down the point and go to this other place. You still have your friends, you still got your job. You rejected Judaism, you pretty much rejected everything about your life. The fact that those social structures were changing. Number 4, communion and baptism. You think about it, kind of weird. These are different type things, but communion and baptism emerged out of that. And then finally, the emergence of the church. The fact that in a system where every new religion is outlawed, we're in a backwater province of Judea in the Roman Empire. You can't make new religions. The fact that the Christian church emerged out of that and turned the world upside down, wonderful evidence for the resurrection. Strobel says this: if the coming into existence of the Christians, a phenomenon undeniably attested by the New Testament, rips a great hole in history, a hole the size and shape of the resurrection, what does the secular historian propose to stop it up with? So he says all this circumstantial evidence, there's a great hole ripped in history, and it's the size and shape of the resurrection. That makes the most sense for all these things. What are you, secular historian? What are you going to stop up that hole with? We're all just crazy? All those people throughout the centuries were just crazy? These disciples that died for their beliefs died knowing it was a lie? What do you propose to stop it up with? What's the most reasonable explanation? With that, I think we're out of time. I encourage you to come back next time where we get into evidence for a beginning and a beginner. It's going to get a little sciencey. I don't want to lose you non-science people. I are one of you. I am kind of a novice, a history, poli-sci major, some philosophy, but the science is cool on it. So let me release us in a quick prayer, and then we'll be on our way. Father, we thank you for the knowability of your truth. We thank you so much that you have revealed yourself to us and that we can know you. Lord God, we just thank you for your grace this morning. We pray that your continued blessing be upon this study, upon this series. I pray with my heart that minds are changing out there, that you're planting seeds of courage in people to go and defend what they believe. I ask your protection be upon us this week. In the name of Jesus, amen.